Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. I'm not in love, so don't forget it. It's just a silly phase. I've got no rhythm. And today I'm going to talk to you about all the books I've been reading recently since I finished Bleak House, which took me a month and a half in one book. And I've got here 6 books which I've read in the last week and a bit. So I managed to build up some reading momentum again. Really happy. Got some non-fiction here, got a couple of great novels, and I'm going to tell you all about them. Banished to the bedroom today, so I think got some good lighting. I hope the sound's okay. Not the most flattering picture of me, but you can see my Strand t-shirt at least. I'll start with the first of these books, which is I'm Into Something Good by Harvey Lisberg, My Life Managing 10cc, Herman's Hermits, and many more. So Herman's Hermits are a Manchester-based band led by cheeky chappy with a goofy grin, Peter Noon. And Harvey Lisberg comes across this band and says, well, maybe I could manage a band. I heard about this guy, Brian Epstein, down the road in Liverpool, who's having some kind of success managing a band, and maybe this is something I could do. He was, I think, trained to be an accountant at the time, and talks about, you know, setting up a deal, working out what he's going to do, and then going and fighting for getting promotional attention for Herman's Hermits. They have a #1 hit in the UK called I'm Into Something Good. Something tells me I'm into something good. A great, classic British beat hit of the 1960s. Over in America, they actually had 2 #1s, novelty hits, to be fair. So there's Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter, written by Trevor Peacock. Yes. And then I'm Henry VIII, I am Henry VIII, I am. But, on the charts, topping the Billboard charts in America with the Beatles, with the Stones, with Sonny and Cher, so although they may not necessarily be remembered today as in the top tier of that British invasion era, Herman's Hermits had considerable success in America and a good run of hits in the UK. And Harvey Lisberg writes about managing them, going across to America, raising the profile, having the hits, choosing which records to release, and it's just a fun ride. As that sort of winds down, as that sort of teen-driven pop success of Herman's Hermits winds down, he's working with 4 other Manchester-based musicians who come together. Are they in a band? And they're not in a band. They play together, and eventually they sort of coalesce into 10cc, based on his lifelong friendship with Graham Gouldman, who was a songwriter before 10cc. He wrote For Your Love for the Yardbirds. And then forms a sort of songwriting partnership with Eric Stewart within 10cc, and there are 2 other members of 10cc, Kevin Godley and Lol Cream, who eventually broke off and had success just as a duo in the charts, but also then became very successful directing pop music videos when MTV was the most important place to be in the world. So, Harvey Lisberg has been at the cutting edge of all these things, and this is stories are told here, anecdotes are told without any kind of bitterness or regret. It's just it's the very best. So he talks about this scruffy duo, Tim and Andrew, who had this mad idea they were going to write a musical based on the Bible story of Joseph, and they were on retainer. He was paying them to be these songs. He was, no success really in pitching this, and it was going to be a musical for children. It was going to cross all sorts of different genre, and didn't really ever manage to get anyone to bite. And then they come back to him with this idea they're going to write a musical next about Jesus, and Harvey Lisberg, a Jewish boy from Manchester, thinks, well, that may be a little bit too far outside my comfort zone, and lets them go. And soon afterwards, Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber became global international stars, from Joseph and His Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat and Jesus Christ Superstar, and on and on. But as I say, this is all written with a smile on his face, a man having lived a good life and had great success, and it's a fun story. And there's one little picture I want to show here of Harvey's parents. That's his mother and father, or as I knew them, Uncle Judy and Auntie Violet. Uncle Judy died when I was already quite young, which is to say that Harvey Lisberg is my mum's first cousin, so my first cousin once removed, so that his parents are my great aunt and uncle. His father was the brother of my grandmother. And I remember Uncle Judy and Auntie Violet very fondly, because one time I remember they came to visit and brought me this yellow sort of matchbox car carrier. So not just it was a thing you could put 2 or 3 cars on top of it, just a little thing. And I had it for a long time as a kid. It's long lost in a toy chest somewhere, and I'm sure it's been passed on and donated. But I remembered long after they kept that visit that they were the ones who brought me, the insignificant son of their niece, had got his own special toy and played with that for many years. So a great story. My mum is actually in the acknowledgements at the back of this book, so that was kind of fun. But a great story all round, without any of the rock and roll excesses and lows to go with the highs, just a sort of generous, warm, positive tale of being around some and participating in some great success. There's also later on he manages Hurricane Higgins and Jimmy Whirlwind White and gets involved in snooker management, and just all the stories are great. This was a fun read, so thank you very much, my cousin Harvey Lisbon. After that, I read the next in the Longmire series. This is the Dark Horse, the 5th in the series. I picked up 5, 6, 7, and 8 at a recent charity shop haul. And yeah, more of the same, good stuff. And this is Longmire. He's a sheriff in Wyoming. And this story, he goes undercover because he's trying to get to the bottom of a murder that's happened. And he doesn't believe the woman who's been arrested and is being held in his jail is really guilty, even though she seems to have confessed. So he goes undercover, but the running joke throughout the whole thing is that he's the worst undercover detective ever. That everyone, it's only like 2 counties over, and people say, well, and he's pretending to be an insurance agent, and people say, well, I met that insurance agent, you're not him. And someone else says, wait, aren't you the sheriff? I saw you in the paper. And it's a terrible running joke all the way through that he's very bad at being undercover. But there's some rottenness going on here, and a real murder and intrigue, and we get to the bottom of who done it, and some good stuff. And I enjoyed that, and looking forward to reading more. After that, I read this book, which I had written to the publishers and asked them to send me a copy, telling them I have this fabulous audience on BookTube who would love to hear me talk about this book. And I read it, and it is Everyday Hate, How Antisemitism is Built into Our World and How You Can Change It, by Dr. Dave Rich, who is head of the CST, I believe, the Community Securities Trust in the UK, who deals with notes and measures rises and falls in anti-Semitism in the UK, and a pretty sound, clear-headed view of what anti-Semitism is, and how it may be on the rise in the UK. So I enjoyed reading this. There's a blurb. Let's have a look at the blurbs on here. So you've got Daniel Finkelstein, Baron Finkelstein. Sacha Baron Cohen is blurbed on the front, who went to my school. David Baddiel, blurbed on the front, went to my school. Marina Hyde didn't. Jonathan Freeland's on the back. Rachel Riley, Julian Neuberger. So a real who's who of anti-racism and people specifically interested in anti-Semitism. I wasn't quite sure what the target audience for this was, and it probably wasn't me. I think this is more for lay people. By lay people, I mean non-Jews, people who aren't intimately involved or haven't, don't know some of these stories as well as I might have done. There were definitely anecdotes here that I didn't know. Anecdotes, stories, instances, things that happened that would take your breath away. That this is happening in 21st century England. This level of antipathy expressed towards Jewish people, or ignorance or denial of the Holocaust. That takes each one of these stories that he talks about is still shocking, and yet I think the overall theme wasn't necessarily new enough to me, or there wasn't a different take or an explanation in that I hadn't heard before. But I think it's a solid read. It's not ponderous or overly academic. Perhaps I didn't find it as sort of shocking and eye-opening as others may, but I would recommend it anyway. And Dave Rich is definitely, he knows this stuff. This is his world, and I think he's a sound voice to be hearing about this problem and how it's still very much a real problem in the UK. That's Everyday Hate, How Anti-Semitism is Built into Our World and How You Can Change It, by Dave Rich. After that, I've got a couple of novels that I read and really, really enjoyed both of them. Very different, but had a fantastic time with each of them. First one is Intimacies by Katie Kitamura, which was a big thing, I guess, a couple of years ago, and it had been on my radar, and I think it had been in my basket on eBay or somewhere, and I just never got around to pulling the trigger and hadn't read it. And I went back now after I finished it to see if there was a lot of people had reviewed it. So it got on my radar because I don't know, maybe it was on a shortlist, or was the tournament of books, or whatever it was. I'd thought about reading it. Haven't read it. It's my first time reading Katie Kitamura. I didn't read A Separation, which has also been well reviewed. I worked out after reading this that her partner is Harry Kunzru, and I really enjoyed his last two books, specifically White Tears, which I've raved about here and elsewhere, and then even his recent one, which I think was as good as White Tears, Red Pill, but I enjoyed both of those, and so I love connecting that circle, seeing that these two are together. But let's talk about this novel, Intimacies by Katie Kitamura. This is, I would say, the clearest connection I made is with someone like Jhumpa Lahiri, especially her last novel, Whereabouts. It's got that kind of antiseptic sort of looking at this through a glass window, as if you're sort of having an out of body experience and observing something, and which seems fairly unintimate, because everything is slightly out of reserve. Some people have also compared it to Rachel Cusk. Well, I've only read the first two in the Outline trilogy, and I loved them both. But I think Lahiri was a closer connection. And this is about a woman, unnamed narrator, who has just lost her father, living in New York with and her father has died, and so that strain of grief actually runs all the way through it. And as a result of that, she's left New York. Her mother has gone back to Singapore, gone to live in Singapore, and she's moved to The Hague. She is a professional translator, and she's working at an equivalent of the International Criminal Court in The Hague, translating in some fairly dire cases. Often these are people on trial for war crimes, and she has to sit there and have things talking in one ear, and they'll be able to translate simultaneously, and people are listening to her. And sometimes she's speaking directly into the ear of a war criminal, and that's a level of intimacy that we took. Then within this life also we see the relationship she's in, the friendship she's made with a woman, the relationship she started with another man, who then it turns out that he's married, but his wife has left him, and the different varying levels of intimacy that are granted in each situation. So there is in her professional life, in her personal life, in her struggle with her grief, which she's never really addressing, but I think, as I say, is underpinning all this sort of emotional frigidity, which she's not really articulating, but seems to be there. And she gets fascinated by other people's relationships. She hears a story about a man who has been beaten up and horribly injured, and gets introduced to his sister, and is fascinated and wants to hear the story about the man. What was he doing? What was there? And he doesn't, seemingly the man doesn't remember anything, and he was never supposed to be in the place he was when he, and all these things. She's involving herself in intimate ways in people's lives, while also remaining at a distance. And I don't think I'm doing this novel justice at all. It's what, 220 pages, and it's just exquisite. Every part of it's so paced, and the fact that we're dealing with intimacies, and yet always seem to be at a reserve, and that resolution of those things. Which is it? Are we going to throw ourselves? Are we going to accept and allow a life that allows for intimate connections, or are we constantly going to be at a remove, be a translator of other people's stories, and not be involved in our own stories? The metaphors seem sort of fairly obvious, but everything about this worked for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed Intimacies by Katie Kitamura, and I think you would too. I'm just going to pause 1 second and stretch my legs. 1 second. Okay, I'm back. So two more books. So after I read Intimacies, I went straight in and read another novel, because it's a novel I had been waiting to read for a while, and this was Salman Rushdie's Victory City, which I picked up recently, and I bloody love this. I've read a whole bunch of Rushdie's books. I think I've done a video about all the Rushdie novels that I've read. I've recently acquired a couple of his essays, his most recent essay collections, and I'm waiting. I'm going to read the first one. So I've got sort of 90 to 2000 and 2000 whatever. But there's the first one, Imaginary Homelands, which I'm going to buy secondhand and read that first. But Rushdie has just been a source of joy for me as a novelist, and I came to Rushdie through the Satanic Verses. That came out when I was 18. It was all the noise, everyone was talking about it. It was the hypest book ever. And so someone had bought a copy, and I read that and went right over my head. And then after that, I went back and read Midnight's Children, because that was the Booker of Bookers, and that was the thing. And Midnight's Children also, to a degree, went over my head. But I persisted with Rushdie, and I've had I think, more joyous experiences with his mid-career novels. So everyone talks about early in his career, his Midnight's Children is the most important, powerful Booker Prize winning and Booker novels. And then the Satanic Verses, which resulted in the fatwa and his living a life of 20 years of being constantly moving and threatened with terrible punishment. But there are some mid-career novels, The Moor's Last Sigh, The Enchanter of Florence, and particularly The Ground Beneath Her Feet, which I really, really loved. The last couple of books weren't so well reviewed. So the most recently was Quixote, which I liked, but it was felt like kind of well, I think it was actually shortlisted for the Booker Prize that year. And before that was The Golden House, which a lot of people didn't like. I kind of did like. But this, it may be the best Rushdie I've read in a long time. I love this. And I'm not going to stand here and try and convince any of you why you need to read Rushdie and why you'll love this book. I'm just going to read the opening sentence, because this opening sentence was everything for me. I knew from this moment forward that I was going to have the time of my life with this book. And if you don't, if this doesn't turn you on, if this doesn't, get you excited, then perhaps this is not for you. But this is a book about myths and storytelling and storytellers. If you've read any Neil Gaiman and you like that, if you've read Garcia Marquez, I sneak peeked into one of his essay collections, and because I saw there was an essay called Gabo, and it's about Salman Rushdie's relationship with Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and when he talks about how when Rushdie talks about when he published his first novel, someone came up and said, "Oh, you must be a massive fan of Marquez," and he had never read it. He rushed out and bought a copy of 100 Years of Solitude, and thought he wasn't going to like it, and was there, and realised that he loved it. So these are fellow travellers along a similar path without necessarily one owing a massive debt to each other. But I've read and loved Garcia Marquez, and this. So I'm going to read you the first sentence of Victory City, and you decide if this is for you or not. On the last day of her life, when she was 247 years old, the blind poet, miracle worker, and prophetess Pampa Campana completed her immense narrative poem about Biznaga and buried it in a clay pot, sealed with wax, in the heart of the ruined royal enclosure, as a message to the future. Now that's the first sentence. That's up there, I think, with the great opening lines of a book, and this pays off. And so I will read you one more part, because I don't think I can do anything more to recommend this book than just read glorious parts. And there's a character is introduced, and just these descriptions of this character tell you everything you need to know about this writing and how electric and exquisite and precise and perfect it is. So this is the beginning of chapter 3. The Portuguese visitor arrived on Easter Sunday. His name was Sunday also. His name was Sunday as well, Domingo Nunez, and he was as handsome as the daylight. His eyes the green of the grass at dawn, his hair the red of the sun as it set, and he had a speech impediment that only made him more charming to the people of the new city, because it allowed him to avoid the arrogance of white men when confronted with darker skins. Wow, just wow. He was as handsome as daylight, his eyes the green of grass, hair the red of the sun, and he had a speech impediment which made him more charming because it allowed him to avoid the arrogance of white men when confronted with darker skins. There is nothing not perfect about that introduction of a new character. And as I said, the writing else, he has like a childlike love of wordplay and alliteration and rhymes. And I am the child sitting there open-eyed, slack-jawed at how glorious and fantastic this is. If none of that appeals to you, move along. But I hope some of you make time of your life for Salman Rushdie in general, and specifically this novel, coming as it's come at this point in his career. It was written and completed before he was attacked, and it's published now, and we are very blessed to be living in a time where Salman Rushdie has beautiful novels to offer us. Victory City by Salman Rushdie, really love that. And then after that, I dove into my first book by Annie Ernaux, the Nobel Prize winning writer, autobiographer. This is my first experience, and this is called Happening, and is a short, 90 pages, and this is a book she published in 2000 about a unwanted pregnancy that she had discovered in 1963. So this is writing about herself as before her marriage, before she later has children. We find out she mentions it very obliquely in the text, but I've looked up, and yes, she later on married and had 2 children. But at 23, she finds herself pregnant. She in a time where abortion was illegal in France, and what she has to go through in order to confirm her pregnancy, and desperately scrabble around and use any contacts, the most tenuous of which she was willing to seek out in order to get some hint about how she can end this situation, this thing, as she calls it in her diary, that has happened to her. She rarely refers to herself as pregnant. It's always this thing, that something is happening. See that? See what she did there? That she needs to resolve. It's just brutally stark. Uh, um, this book is written 20 years ago, but to be reading it in 2023, when she's writing about 1963 and how difficult it was and how taboo and illegal it was to get an abortion, that is remarkably current now in 2023. This is a book about a woman looking back on her younger self and the uncertainty and the fear and the sense of, what are we doing? What can who am I? Who can I be? This is she describes herself as a young woman from the working classes, and so to have got where she's got to be a student in Paris, this is a managed to break out of a cycle of poverty and of rural working class identity, and she's poised to blow all that advantage she's claimed for herself by being a single mother, a pregnant, unmarried woman. So dealing with that guilt, not guilt, she seems to have very little guilt about terminating the pregnancy, but there's guilt about if she carries on with this and letting everyone down and letting herself down and destroying her future, that she's very never wavers for a second about wanting to terminate this pregnancy. And it's not a book about that. It's not a book about someone second guessing the decision to terminate a pregnancy. It's a book about the stress and the strain of having to go through this, face your friends, explain it, avoid telling your parents, the shame of telling a doctor who will refuse to give you any advice about terminating a child because it's illegal and it's immoral, and all the reasons that this person who is meant to be dedicated to your medical good health is using their own sense of morality to dictate how they behave towards you. In 90 short pages, we get the whole story, including the absolute stark details about the termination and what happens subsequently. It's beautifully written. It's very spare. It's a tough read. I recommend it to everyone because it's as my first introduction to Ernaux. I think I'm going to be reading more because I thoroughly was blown away by this. That is Happening by Annie Ernaux. And after reading one book, it's translated, I should say, translated from the French by Tanya Leslie. I believe it translated a lot of Ernaux's work up to about 2000. I think there's a new translator who's done the later stuff, but you'll see Tanya Leslie's name on a whole bunch of earlier Ernaux translations. And after reading one book sort of set in and around Paris, she ends up having to go to Paris to find somebody to help her terminate the pregnancy. I thought I'd read another book about Paris, and I'm back with Zola in The Belly of Paris, which I started. I'm 20 pages in. I'm going to read more of that over this week, and that's where I'm at. So that was a long time talking about all the books, but I hope you're all caught up now. I hope you're all keeping well. God bless. Like to speak to you. Bye.